Hey guys, so today we are going to talk about Storybook, so let's get into it. Storybook, this is a good one. I have so much history with Storybook, not by using it, but let me explain. So Storybook, for those of you who don't know it, is basically a tool that allows you to create a component library for your React components. That's at least the intention behind it. It allows you to do local testing and development and create so-called stories where you can create components and put them in different states and very easily search for components and switch between them and see them in the different states. And Storybook very much ties into this trend that we are seeing in not only front-end but in design as well, where it's very popular these days to have component libraries, design libraries, things that follow the same type of mindset that you will see came kind of about way back when with Bootstrap and all of these standardized ways of creating layouts. So today, to give you a slight bit of context, my colleague actually was kind of funny because one of my coworkers was saying that they had some thoughts about how to solve a particular issue. Very soon we will get to a point where we will need to support theming, and basically the idea from my coworkers has been to use Storybook as this way to create a consistency in our designs and our components and all of that good stuff, right? So that we can be consistent. Now, I've had a few thoughts on this. I haven't said anything because I learned the hard way to be quiet until I am certain, or rather to just bide my time and strike when the time is right, as opposed to be the first person who comes in as the new person and says, oh yeah, all of this is bullshit, we should refactor everything or we should redo it. I learned that in a very, very hard way at my previous job. God damn, I learned my lesson. I'll never do this again, or rather I will never be the guy again who comes in and says that, hey, we need to rewrite everything, trust me. However, my coworkers have started to realize, this was in stand-up today, which they asked such a great question, because one of my colleagues said that Storybook has been misbehaving a little bit and he had fixed it. And one of my coworkers then stated the very obvious question, well, it's been down for like forever. Are we even using Storybook anymore? And then my coworker started kind of saying, well, no, not really. I used to use it a little bit, but I don't really use it. And it actually turned out that none of them were really using it. And so they kind of said, well, I wonder why, because it was our CTO who had implemented it way back when. And so here's sneaky Frederick asking the obvious question. Well, guys, why are we not using Storybook? And they kind of said, well, because our designers, they have their own artboards and their own component libraries, like their own design, so they don't really use it, and we don't really use it because we need to go to the actual application and it's much faster to just spin this up the server and use the actual application, right? Because we can do local development. Okay, that's true, but isn't Storybook really a way for us to be consistent? And they kind of went, well, yeah, it's kind of a way for us to create a joint place where we can see all our components and reuse those components and do all of that stuff, right? And I said, but we are using material UI, basically like all the way, which is a framework, a design framework, or a React framework, a React take on material UI. So we don't really have a consistency problem at all. I mean, it would have made sense, I suppose, if we had a lot of designers who changed everything all the time and wanted to make custom components for everything that we make, but we don't really have that issue. And they said, well, no, I kind of suppose not. And then I worked my way in, nestled my way in, and I said, I wonder what's going to happen when we need to support custom themes and things of that nature, and we need to expand on what we define as a component and maybe add features to, well, basically to our development process on the request of our designers. I wonder what's going to happen then, because Storybook is really only designed to solve a very specific type of problem. And they kind of went, yeah, and we don't really use it. Maybe we can throw it away. And I said, yes, we can. And then I explained to them my journey, where I explained to them that I've actually had this journey before. It was when I was working at my previous job, Storybook was coming around, and we had some pressure from, well, not pressure, but our architects and so forth. They were hyping everything that was React oriented, and they hyped Storybook with everybody else. And we were talking, me and my coworker, about this, and he was kind of saying that maybe we should use this thing. And I said, no, let's build our own thing. And he went like, why? And I said, why do you want to use Storybook? You're simply going to lock yourself into a solution that gives you what basically is a sidebar with a search field and a way, like, yeah, absolutely, it's nice to be able to switch states, but it's basically just a static web server with a search box and a sidebar. That's what it is. I actually hosted a tech talk. Well, not hosted. I presented a tech talk here in Gothenburg where I showed what we did instead. And what we did at my previous job was to spend 2 hours, roughly, to make the basic design. And then my colleague, who is a little bit, he likes to make things even prettier than they need to be. So he took another day or two to make it really nice and shiny and perfect in every way. And we made our own implementation of Storybook in basically the same amount of time it would have taken to download the whole thing and make a presentation to show everybody at the company how we did it. And it worked absolutely flawlessly. It worked every bit as well as Storybook itself, with one major distinction or benefit apart from that. It was extensible. We could extend on it. And one of the things that I can tell you from experience is that it's not all that often that you have to support themes and more complicated features when you talk about UI components and so forth. But to see the strength of Storybook really only becomes relevant to you if you have either such a massive project, and we had that. The Ticketmaster website is massive. Like, it has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of components. So it's very convenient to have a local setup where you can just go and look at all the components. So you can just, when you kind of want to hack things, you put things together, and then you can deploy them to the main web page, and then you start doing your testing there. So that makes it very convenient. But for our use case here at my smaller company, it's completely redundant because the app isn't big enough to actually create much of a difference in time. So that's out. And then it comes to the thing of, okay, let's be consistent. Well, okay, sure. If we were making custom components all the time and we had an issue where we remade the same components over and over and there was no consistency, or we had a designer that had that type of process, or a process that didn't work as well as we wanted to, then Storybooks makes a lot of sense, because from my experience, that's actually the problem that I had at Ticketmaster, where the designers remade things over and over. And by creating as I said, we didn't use Storybook, we just created a design library or component library. We could simply decide with our design team that, hey, this is the component that we're going to use for every single use case. So it was basically a political move from the developer's side. So that's another use case. That's one use case for Storybook as well. But in our current company, since we already have a framework that has decided ahead of time for us what everything is going to look like, it becomes redundant again. So when it comes to Storybook, it's actually, as I've said before, it was kind of when I was hosting my presentation, I was showing the tool that we built. I got the question, why didn't you use Storybook? And I said, because it's a very dumb move. And the audience kind of went, well, what do you mean? I'm not saying that Storybook is a bad tool. I'm simply stating that what you're doing is that you're depending on a nice to have thing that, and now you are locked in to the features and the flexibility or whatever that happens in Storybook, when you could have made your own implementation that works basically as well as Storybook, because it's not a difficult it's a very trivial application. The idea is very simple. You could make that in just a few hours with a few tech savvy front-end people, and then you can extend it to do whatever you want, because it's not a complicated, I'm not trying to say that it's not a complicated product. I'm just saying that the idea is very simple and the value is very negligible, because it's not a must-have type of thing, but people use it and think that it's going to bring all this value. And in my experience, it actually doesn't bring all that much value unless you already have the problems that Storybook will solve for you. And even then, I argue that you might as well build your own thing, unless you're very short on time and you know for a fact that it's going to be valuable to you. In my personal experience, it's not. And for my company, which is now, this is basically going to prove my point. I'm waiting. I'm skulking around the meeting rooms. And next, I'm going to wait until somebody says, but now we need to support theming, and the designer, he wants to be able to check how the different brand styles are going to look in the different, with different fonts and different colors and all that stuff. So now we need a very efficient way to switch between themes and define themes, because the designer needs to be able to quickly just add a theme or remove a theme and stuff of that nature. And that's where I'm going to grab them. I'm going to skulk into that meeting and say, well, what happens if maybe we could just, I'm thinking out loud here, if you give me a day, I could put together a application, a service that allows you to list and search for all these components, and it will be able to actually allow you to set your brand and check different brands against each other and actually save them directly to our file system, so the developers don't have to do all this manual work, and the designer can do that as however he or she wants. And they kind of go, wow, cool, can you do that in Storybook? No, you can't. But I can. We can make it, because at the end of the day, Storybook may have been right for us in the beginning, but it's not right for right now. So let's migrate to something better. Let's make our own thing. And that's exactly how I feel about Storybook. So guys, to summarize, don't use Storybook unless you know for a fact that it's going to give you a lot of value. And the only time I've ever found Storybook to be really useful is if you have like a remote working environment, or you have a real problem with consistency or something of that nature. But otherwise, no, there's absolutely virtually no reason to use it. That's at least from my experience. I still think that there are use cases for it, but I think that this is when somebody says to me that, oh, we use Storybook, then to me, unless I can really see that, wow, this was a really good choice, I usually just kind of think, all right, cool, this is another place where they add libraries like painkillers, even though they don't really need it, because the value that you get from Storybook is high for a very specific use case, but for the most part, you're actually better off by not using it or rolling your own implementation, at least for long-term development. Have a great day.